Grand Theft Auto has had a lot of playable characters over the years. Those characters have ranged from completely deranged psychotic killers to slightly less deranged, damaged human beings who also commit acts of horrible violence quite regularly. Some of those protagonists are definitely worse than others, but if you lived in the GTA universe yourself and knew about 13 of these crazy individuals, who would be the most terrifying? Who is the most brutal GTA protagonist across the series? Excluding the 2D era games, I'm so sorry 2D fans. Well, I just so happen to have made a full series exploring each of these individuals, so first I will quickly go over each of their most egregious crimes and the estimated kill count I made for each of them. Then I'll try to determine which of them is actually the most terrifying. Before we get started, be aware that there will be a Patreon ad in the middle of the video, but with that out of the way, let's get into it. So, as per usual, let's start off with GTA 3 and the handsome handyman, the Silent Reaper, Claude. Claude detonates a car bomb in front of a public restaurant, for starters, and then later blows up an entire factory on the south side of Portland. He also blows up a huge tanker ship at the Portland docks, but perhaps more so than a lot of the protagonists, especially as we get further down the list, Claude was one thing: brazen. Claude would do crazy things that aren't huge spectacles necessarily by GTA standards, but a lot more likely to attract attention from onlookers and likely spread the word that this man is not someone that you want to screw with. He'll gun down pimps in the street openly, kill cops and anybody else who stands in his way, and not to mention just randomly commit murderous rampages, since those were still a thing in GTA 3. He will also betray just about anybody without any hesitation, and without ever acknowledging it to anybody, including himself. He's like the Terminator. He doesn't say anything, but he will come for you, and he will probably kill you. Perhaps the protagonist who is most like a literal serial killer than any other. The high estimated kill count I came up with for Claude in an average playthrough is just shy of 400 at 397, and the low estimated kill count I have for him is 264. With Tommy Vercetti, we are finally given a window into what our protagonist is thinking, and it definitely makes him more relatable and perhaps less brutal than Claude, but Tommy is, nonetheless, completely deranged. I mean, he literally chases a man with a chainsaw and then canonically slaughters him on the street in broad daylight. Well, I guess the time isn't known, but still, a chainsaw. Even the guy in Scarface did it in the bathroom. He blows up plenty of buildings too, like Claude, and I mean, he steals a tank from the military single-handedly, for God's sakes. Tommy does keep things a bit more business first, though, as opposed to Claude. Unlike Claude, he actually has complex motivations and wants to build and keep a criminal empire, so he doesn't engage in quite as much outright destruction. However, the rampages are still a thing, which, if we include those, puts him right back up there with Claude for just randomly going on murderous sprees that are at least arguably canonical. His estimated high kill count is 622, and low is 524. Carl Johnson. Now, Carl's game is much longer, or at least has a lot more missions and spans a much greater area, so he definitely has a clear advantage when it comes to numbers. But CJ is also just brutal at times, more so because of his tendency to just switch. One minute, he's a relatable, misguided, but empathetic human being who stands up for his friends and family, and the next minute, he's literally kidnapping an innocent music producer and his even more innocent girlfriend, and then not only killing them, but torturing them by both sending them to drown in their car at the bottom of the ocean, but also doing so knowing that it's one of their actual worst fears. Like, that is so messed up. I never forget about this, and if you're wondering, this is definitely one of, but not the only reason I'm often harder on CJ. He's a great character, but super inconsistent because of missions like this. Or like, And this is just an option, usually for lazy players like myself, but it can nonetheless still be canon, when CJ murders a potential girlfriend to get her ID card for a heist. Also super messed up. Even Woozy is like, dude.
What the fuck? How? When?
Aside from these kinds of things though, Carl doesn't actually do nearly as much harm to the general public as it seems if you don't count gang members. Many more of the people that Carl harms are themselves also violent and part of the game, for lack of a better way of putting it. I'm not sure how much Carl actually considers this, but it is worth considering for this video. Carl may not be consistently brutal, but his ability to suddenly become brutal at the drop of a hat with no trigger definitely makes him a little bit more scary to me. Again though, in terms of numbers, he is hard to beat, as his low estimated kill count is 1,415, and his high is a whopping 2,727. Next up, technically speaking, is a character I wager you've never heard of, Myke from GTA Advance. But he is, technically, a part of the GTA 3D universe, and he's actually quite brutal. I don't remember every mission of GTA Advance as vividly as the others in the series, but I do know that rampages are back in this game, so Myke for sure does that. I also remember that Myke ends the game literally driving a tank through the streets of Liberty City, which even Claude never did canonically. So Myke definitely deserves a mention, although he might be a little bit too naive to actually win, especially with some of his competition. Yep, now here is the guy to beat. Toni freaking Cipriani. Toni is easily one of the least empathetic protagonists in the series. He has more motivation than Claude, and some relationships that are, I guess, technically sort of positive, but he also butchers a man to death with a meat cleaver inside his own factory, and then purposefully sells the meat back to that man's meat shop, so that his customers are literally eating him the next day. Wow. Okay, what else? Well, he murders the mayor, for one thing, and helps a cannibalistic mayoral candidate in their bid to replace the man that he killed. With seemingly no guilt or shame, he also goes on rampages, again, like Claude, Tommy, and Myke, which isn't all that surprising, but he drives a freaking fire truck through the streets of a busy city, killing as many people as possible in the name of the Lord. He goes on a murderous spree in the city's public park by gutting people with a katana, and wait, what else? I feel like I'm forgetting something. Oh yeah, he literally blows up Little Italy.
Supposed to be a killer like it. I heard a marvelous piece on double.
So yes, in terms of NPCs you actually kill, CJ has better numbers, but because of some rough calculations when considering the size and population of Liberty City compared to the real-world New York, the low estimated kill count I have for Toni is still 6,157, and his high is 9,179, in part because of the many side activities he does, which also involve usually killing a lot of civilians. So yeah, Toni is kind of the guy to beat, and I bet a lot of you know who his main competition will be. But it isn't Victor Vance, that's for sure. Now, Victor is a lot like CJ, in that a lot of his victims, the vast majority, are themselves also criminals. He also just doesn't really do anything that's like above and beyond brutal to literally anyone. Vic is a nice guy. I guess he does hit a golf ball at a man tied to a buoy, who then blows up, but that wasn't his idea, and he didn't seem to enjoy it necessarily. And sure, he is still responsible for his fair share of what could probably be perceived as public acts of terrorism, like destroying the Cholo warehouse, or the downtown skyscraper in the finale, but overall, Vic doesn't do a lot of brutal things, when stacked up against other protagonists, but he does do rampages since they're in the game, and if we count them for others, we have to count them for him. Once again though, all of the rampages are on gang members, but that's actually true of all rampages across the series. There are always some in all of the games though, which involve blowing up random vehicles, where civilians are definitely the main victims. His low estimated kill count is still pretty high at 977, and his high is 1289, most of which comes from his criminal empire business dealings. This video and all videos on my channel are brought to you in large part by the wonderful support of my patrons on patreon.com. An extra special thank you to my executive producer tier patrons, Ezra Hambrick, Mason Collin, Chuck K45, and King GTA 15, as well as my Walker Villain tier patron, Michael Vandenberg. Patrons at these tiers also have the option to promote a little bit of their own content, so this video is brought to you by Ezra's Let's Play channel, Scott Games 99, Mason Collins' podcast channel, We're About Everything, and Chuck K45's Upstart Farming channel. I release all videos a little early to patrons, and completely uncensored. I give you any of the original music tracks I've created for a given video, and for extra generous supporters, you can even reserve a slot for your favorite game in my ongoing series, The Game Vault. You'll also get to see your name in the credits of all videos that are produced while you're pledged, get access to a small patron-only Discord where you can easily speak with me or see little behind-the-scenes snippets, and you'll receive my eternal gratitude. Seriously, especially these days, those of you who support my work directly are absolutely incredible, and I can't properly express how grateful I am to you all. Thank you so much. Patreon.com/thecriminalhistorian. Niko is a lot like Victor Vance here in that he doesn't do a lot of truly brutal things in the context of other series protagonists, at least. The most brutal things he does are often the result of deliberate player choice, but are nonetheless canonical, like killing Ivan or Derek McCreary, but he never goes out of his way to, say, hack a man to death with a cleaver or something Cipriani style. Nothing like that at all. He does get respectable numbers, but again, most of them are criminals, and since GTA 4 does away with rampages, unless the player goes out of their way to harm civilians, Niko doesn't kill basically any in the whole story, or at least, when he does, he feels bad about it, and generally has no interest in bringing misery to those who are just trying to live a normal life. Sometimes he totally will though, but never with a freaking meat cleaver. His low estimated kill count is 761, and his high is 1045. This trend of mostly avoiding civilians is present throughout most of the GTA 4 era, but Johnny Klebitz is a bit more brutal, perhaps, than Niko, or at least seems to have less sympathy for most of the people that he harms. He does still generally go out of his way not to harm civilians though, and even his most brutal acts, like setting a house on fire to kill a man with a grenade launcher, or storming a state penitentiary, are still mostly committed against other criminals, though he likely killed far more guards than other prisoners in his prison break-in. He does kidnap people though, no issues with that, and only has minor objections to handing those people off to terrifying Russian mobsters, so there's that, I suppose. At least in my rough estimations, based off of my one playthrough, he does have a higher death count than Niko thanks in no small part to all of the gang wars that he participates in. His low estimate is Niko's high at 1045, and his high is 1179. Much of what's been said for Niko, Johnny, and even Victor is also true, though, of Luis Lopez. He doesn't really seem to get kicks out of torturing people or blowing up buildings, although a little incidental terrorism for selfish reasons is something that all of the people here have been capable of. Louise is laid back and definitely not the type to ever have an interest in going out of his way to hurt somebody for the pleasure of the pain itself, or kill somebody in an extraordinarily brutal way for the sake of it. Now, he does seem like he'd do that if somebody messed with his family or the people that he truly cares about, but that's about it, and I could also see Johnny and Niko doing that. I mean, Niko does do that. Louise also has the lowest estimated kill count of all the HD era protagonists, with a low of 692 and a high of 790. Huang Li, on the other hand, kinda breaks the trend of HD protagonists who mostly avoid killing civilians and returns to a more 3D era style of complete indifference to all the chaos he both witnesses and causes. Rampages are back in this game, for one thing, but Huang himself also participates in things like driving a minigun-holding maniac through the streets to gun people down. He does have plenty of empathy for some people, but usually for other criminals that remind him of himself. Less so for those who are not part of the life, but he doesn't necessarily go looking to kill innocent people. He just cares significantly less than a Niko or a Johnny or a Louise. At least I think. Now, I calculated 4 totals for Huang back when I made these lists for GTA biographies. If all side activities are considered canon, which is basically how I've been operating so far, then his low estimated kill count is a massive 2,818, and his high is 6,332, which is the highest on its own if Tony Cipriani's destruction of Fort Staunton isn't counted, since that was itself another estimate based on the size of the real-world Little Italy in New York. So Huang is easily the character so far who you actually canonically kill the most people as yourself. On to our first of the 3 GTA 5 protagonists with Franklin Clinton. Now, Franklin is mostly the same as a Niko, a Victor, Johnny, or a Louise. He doesn't do much that would be considered brutal by the standards set by our other protagonists. He does do plenty of screwed up shit, like his role in all of the heists, or some of the ways he assassinates people, but he goes out of his way to not target civilians, like many of the other mostly good-natured, sort of, protagonists in the series. These are our good boys, but there's only so much room for them, and we've officially run out. Franklin's totals are reflective of this, with a low estimated kill count of only 159 and a high of 679. Like I said though, there are only bad boys left, and next up we have Michael DeSanta. Now, Michael does mostly go out of his way to avoid killing civilians. He doesn't seem to really enjoy that part. He never hacks a man up for his sweetmeats, but he definitely can be brutal. As a seasoned bank robber, he killed many, many, many cops and endangered so many civilians in his criminal career that it's practically uncountable. If anything, his willingness to betray almost everyone around him is the thing that makes Michael more brutal than, say, Franklin. Michael may not enjoy suffering generally, but suffering is often something that follows in his wake, and he doesn't care much about those caught in its path of destruction. Think like how Michael is about the whole Mr. K situation. Sure, he asks them to be nice to the guy, but then proceeds to basically not care at all when he's tortured. Not like he likes him being tortured, just like he really couldn't care less. He has always got bigger fish to fry. He has also appropriately got higher numbers than Franklin, naturally, with a low estimate of 233 and a high of 722. But last, and most certainly not least, we have to talk about Tony Cipriani's real competition, Trevor Phillips. Now, here's somebody who most definitely did enjoy the torture of Mr. K. I mean, he was the torturer. Trevor is almost the definition of brutal in Grand Theft Auto. He's a literal cannibal, goes on rampages against people both guilty and innocent, willingly delivers civilians to a cult of cannibals in the mountains, and most definitely has killed people with a meat cleaver, even if we never see him do it in a mission. I could go on, but I mean, come on, it's Trevor Phillips. His numbers, though, while certainly much higher than the other two GTA 5 protagonists, still fails to come close to a lot of the madness that the 3D era protagonists, and even the ones from GTA 4 got up to. His estimated low kill count is 377, and his high is 836. Now, I don't remember specifically how I came up with these numbers. It was quite a while ago, and like I said, they're only estimates, but I think the numbers, while interesting, are less important to the question in this video's title. And I think there's an unspoken question that needs to be addressed in order to answer it. It's pretty obvious that it has to come down to two people, at least for me. It's either Toni Cipriani or Trevor Phillips. Who is more brutal? Well, I think the obvious answer is Trevor Phillips. I mean, he's almost flamboyant about how insane he is, but the thing is, Trevor does a lot of the things he does seemingly because it's entertainment. Trevor is brutal and terrifying. However, Trevor does not blow up an entire neighborhood for the sake of winning a petty gang war. Now, would he? Honestly, if that block was mostly civilians, maybe, but I think it would only be if those civilians were people that he considered otherwise bad. He would have some kind of reasoning, and even then, I really don't think he would do something like that, just that it wouldn't completely surprise me if he did. Toni, though, Toni does what he does for such petty, insignificant reasons. Again, I want to contextualize this. In Liberty City stories, there is an entire neighborhood called Fort Staunton that was basically Little Italy. Little Italy in real life is not in Brooklyn, which is roughly what Portland was meant to be as far as I'm aware, so St. Mark's is different. In the world of the 3D era, Staunton Island is basically our Manhattan. So Little Italy on Manhattan is basically completely destroyed, just gone. Now, Liberty City in 2001 is about half the size, population-wise, as the real-world New York was, 4 million to New York's 8. So again, rough numbers, about 30,000 people live in Little Italy today, but I couldn't find numbers on 2001. But whatever the population of Little Italy Manhattan in 2001 was, have that, and Toni killed at least that many people. However you calculate it, it's so freaking nuts, and I think it's the single most brutal act in the whole game. In the whole series. Also, let's not forget about Casa. Even Trevor doesn't do something like this. Even Trevor doesn't. For me, the answer to the question posed in the title is obvious, really. It's Toni Cipriani, and it'll probably always be him. I am hard at work right now on a very long video, so keep your eyes peeled. It should be coming out by the end of April at the very latest, but hopefully much sooner. We'll see. Thank you so much for watching today's video, and I will see you again next week. Have yourself a wonderful evening.